As I mentioned on a different video, a lot of the laws in this week's Parsha have to do with coexistence between people, behavior between different people, both in terms of the financial damage that one might do to another, or one's animal, or one's non-living object, a bore, a certain hole in the ground that one dug, and now it caused a death or damage or to some animal, for example. All of these laws are discussed, but also the various other correct relationships between people. And of course the Talmud teaches us that even when somebody compensated the damage that he did directly or through some object of his, it's usually not enough. One has to also ask for forgiveness. And some of the laws in this week's reading have to do with the Beit Din, with the Jewish court, the judgments and the correct behavior of judges. A lot of these laws will also be in the last book of Moshe, in the book of Dvarim, especially in Parshat Shoftim, but some of these laws are here. And in particular, it says, for instance, not to take shochad, a bribe. As our sages explain, even a person who does not really plan to change the judgment, he'll take the bribe, but he's gonna try to be objective in his judgment. Still, the bribe is a bribe. The bribe has this quality, this tendency to make a person see things a certain way. There is a certain hint in the word itself. A shochad, a bribe in Hebrew, can be read as a kind of shechad, that he is one now. Instead of two plaintiffs in front of the judge, he only sees one. The person who gave him a bribe, he will always see favorably, even if he doesn't really want it, even if he wants to offer an issue fair judgment. Once he is bribed, he is bribed. There is no way for him to be objective anymore. This is a very important principle. And among other things, also it mentions here lo tisah shem hashav, which includes, according to our sages, the prohibition of listening to gossip and to false reports, but also for the judge to listen to one plaintiff before the other one arrived. Again, once you have a certain impression, once you hear one side of the story, it's very hard to change that impression when the other side is offered. So I think all of these laws tell us a lot, tell us volumes about the moral responsibility of people today. We know, of course, that Israel at this point involved in a horrendous war which started with the most barbaric and sadistic attack that is unimaginable. Even the Nazis did not do what the Hamas and the people of Gaza did. And Israel, with all that, tries to protect the civilians to the best degree possible. And Hamas is using civilians as human shields. It's unbelievable how many civilians would have been killed if Israel actually indiscriminately bombed all the places where there are rockets that present real danger. The rockets that Hamas is sending can kill tens of people. They land on schools, they land on kindergartens. So Israel has full right to immediately destroy them before they are launched. But that would cause hundreds of Gazan civilians to be killed, and that's why Israel doesn't do that. That's why there are actually so few, even according to Hamas statistics, which is totally not reliable, obviously, as they already caught red-handed a number of times on obvious lies, the most famous being when the hospital was not fully bombed. It was their own rocket, the rocket of Islamic Jihad, that landed near the hospital, not in the actual hospital, and they claimed that hundreds of people, like 500 or more people, that Israel killed in a bombing of the hospital. So there were at least two lies there. The hugely inflated number of casualties and the fact that Israel actually didn't bomb there at all. It was actually a bomb that was their own. And thousands of their rockets land on Gaza itself. And obviously all of those people killed are counted by Hamas as if they are killed by Israel. In fact, anybody who dies at this point in time in Gaza is counted as a victim of Israeli bombings or Israeli killings. And the fact is, when the population is so big, over about 2 million people, then in over 100 days, the average number of people that would die would be something like over 10,000. You could count it easily. Take the average age, expected life expectancy in Gaza, something like 70-something years, and count how many people will be dying every day on average. So the number of so-called casualties that Hamas is claiming is just slightly more than twice the amount of people that would die under completely normal life when there is no war at all. This is just the statistics for such a huge population. When the war is so long, there will be people dying. So the casualty numbers of Hamas is very much inflated. But even if we were to take that number, still the number of people killed who are civilians compared to the number of terrorists killed, the proportion is still much less than in similar operations that US did in Mosul, in Iraq recently, and in the war of Afghanistan and many other wars. It's just impossible to wage a war without civilian casualties, unfortunately. Israel is not trying to target civilians, but they're constantly being slandered as if they're targeting civilians, even though a very simple calculation, like I said, would clearly prove it's not so. It's obvious that if Israel wanted to kill civilians, they would kill 1 million civilians on the first day of the war. It's so obvious that Israel does have the weapons to kill a million Gaza residents easily. Moreover, even if Israel simply targeted all the rocket launches without specifically targeting civilians, still there will be hundreds of thousands of Gaza citizens dead. But even according to Hamas statistics, the number is 20-something thousand that was killed. 20-something thousand when 10,000 of them are terrorists. So this is very, very careful way that Israel is waging war. I'm not even talking about the fact that Israel sent over 1 million messages, phone calls, flyers to tell the Gaza residents where to move, where out of harm's way. All of this is obvious to anybody who has a little bit of brains or does a little bit of research. So why is large part of the world so biased against Israel? Because of two things: because of the bribe, and because of the listening to the other side first all the time. Every time when Hamas comes out with their statistics, and a lot of times the TV stations and the various internet sites immediately quote it and show images, this makes people incredibly bribed and incredibly biased, that they don't want to hear when Israel actually tries to figure out what actually happened and where this rocket came from and what actually caused. And by that time already, people assume that it's Israel who killed the poor Gaza citizens. And by the way, I'm not saying it sarcastically, poor Gazan citizens. I'm sure there are people in Gaza, all kinds of people. Unfortunately, the vast majority of them support Hamas. But there are some people at least that don't. And even those who support Hamas, they're not necessarily murderers. There's a difference between supporting Hamas and actually going and murdering people. So I don't believe that all the Gaza residents deserve death. I don't believe it at all. And Israel is doing everything to try to save the residents of Gaza from Hamas. I think some of them are now starting to realize that, but it's going to take a while to denazify Gaza. The other problem is, of course, the bribe. What are the bribes? Well, for one thing, huge amounts of money from nations like Qatar, which supports Hamas, that's the sponsor of Hamas. Huge amounts of money is poured into American universities, for instance. Whole departments sometimes exist on these huge grants. Can you imagine that these people should be not biased after all this? All their sustenance, all their salary depends on grants from these types of countries that want to promote a certain type of agenda and to present things a certain type of way. Can there be any doubt that the professors and the students who hear this are going to be incredibly biased? Is there any doubt about it? Even smart ones, even righteous ones, the shochad, the bribe, makes them blind. Notice how the word tzadikim in this verse, Vayisalev divrei tzadikim, there is disputes, by the way, what it's talking about, the tzadikim themselves that become biased after taking the bribe, or the words of tzadikim, the righteous words that become not acceptable anymore once people are biased and bribed. But whatever the case may be, the word tzadikim here is unique in the entire Torah. It's spelled with two yuds. meaning even full tzaddikim, that's spelled tzadikim, the very unusual spelling, unique spelling, as Minchat Shai points out, even they will be totally biased. Once a bribe is taken, there is no tzaddikim anymore. There is no righteousness anymore. Bribed people cannot be righteous, cannot be unbiased. The UNRWA organization of UN, which has full support and has more money than all the other organizations dealing with refugees all over the world, with tens, hundreds of millions of refugees that have been resettled over the last, let's say, 50 years. This one organization takes more money than all of them combined. And how could they not be biased after this? Their own employees are Hamas members. Can these people have positive view of Israel? How long will it take to denazify Gaza? After a whole generation grew up on enormous propaganda and with billions of dollars poured into this. There's so much money that Gaza residents got over this time. They could have built Singapore over there, better than Singapore. And it's not like they don't have the talents or the skills. They do have the talents. They just use them in order to build tunnels under earth, in order to destroy Israel. That's what they use all the money for. Instead of building a Singapore there, they have beaches, they have everything. Israel did not declare blockade on Gaza until they started sending rockets with the intent to kill as many Israelis as they could. So then Israel started a blockade, but even a blockade, what does it mean exactly? They're stopping the import of weapons or anything that can be used for weapons. Everything else flows into Gaza as much as people are willing to donate. Israel doesn't stop the necessities flowing into Gaza. If Hamas would stop their propaganda, if a reasonable government will come in Gaza and people will be educated to live alongside Israel, then there's no question that blockade will be eventually lifted. Once Israel is sure about their sincere intent to live peacefully as neighbors. In fact, until October 7th, they used to give more and more Gaza residents jobs in Israel because they thought that it seems that maybe Hamas is now changing its ways and maybe they are willing to coexist. And it turned out it was all a ploy, that Hamas all this time was hiding the fact that they're planning a massacre, the most barbaric massacre of Jews with the worst possible atrocities. May Hashem save us from all of these monsters.